The first Hunger Games book came out in 2008 and was a smash hit that led to a sea of copycats in the young dystopian genre. Years later, The Hunger Games has spin-offs and prequels, while most of the copycats have faded into obscurity. Today we're going to find out why. The copycat effect is nothing new. Whenever something is a breakout hit, imitators follow. After Harry Potter, there was a slew of books and movies with magical kids going to magic schools. After Nirvana, there were a bunch of Nirvana bands that tried to emulate their sounds but missed the nuance. So I could say the Hunger Games copycats simply didn't capture all the nuance of the original, like a knockoff band. Or I could say the Hunger Games was better written. But what the hell does better written mean exactly? First, there's something called suspension of disbelief. That means that you, as an audience member or a reader, know that the story isn't real, but you put your disbelief aside because the creator convinces you the story is good enough to be worth it. When I watch Star Wars, I know spaceships wouldn't make noise in space or explode into fireballs because there's no air in space. But I don't care because Star Wars is cool. Harry Potter asks us to believe that there are witches and wizards living amongst us in secret. Sure, okay. I know that's not real, but I'm on board. They use owls to send messages? Okay, I'm with you. As long as it makes sense in the world you're creating, great. But if the internal logic in the Harry Potter world fell apart, we would have lost interest in the story. We could forgive the occasional plot hole or the occasional, wait, if they could do this, why didn't they just do this? As long as the payoff of the story is worth it. The Hunger Games, even though it had elements that were far-fetched, was always grounded with just enough logic to keep us along for the ride. Some of the imitators, not so much. For example, one of the things that became a cliche in the genre, being split into groups.
Smooth move, kid. Showing up on category day? Now you're gonna get put in a category.
And now you'll be put into groups.
In the Hunger Games, the citizens of Panem are split into districts. But in this world, that makes sense. If America really did slip into a dystopian society, the people of Appalachia could end up in a district known for coal production. Because that part of the country is already known for coal production. This scenario of America falling into dystopia and being carved into districts isn't likely, but it's organic to the story. In Divergent, people are split into groups based on their chief personality trait? What? Why? Other than the writer thought it would be cool to have a book where people were divided by personality traits so one of them could later shatter that oppressive system, why was this an idea that anyone would have? If you took over the world and could force people to follow your rules, would splitting people up into groups based on their chief personality trait ever enter your mind? How would that benefit you? So when the premise of your novel is hinged on a wait, what moment, you really better blow people's minds to get them to accept that premise. Think of The Matrix. Aliens took over humanity and strapped them to virtual reality machines where they think they're living in turn of the millennium Earth to keep them pacified so they can harness their energy to use them as a power source. That is crazy. But by the time we find that out, we're so engrossed in the story that we're like, sure, I'm in. The other aspect of the Hunger Games that is far-fetched, but also just believable enough for us to suspend disbelief is, well, the Hunger Games. When the book first came out, there was a lot of controversy about this. You had some whiners, they have teenagers fighting to the death, wah, wah, wah. Yes, it had shock value and gets your attention, but The Hunger Games was more than just teenagers fighting to the death. And it was based on real events, specifically the gladiators of ancient Rome and the Greek myth of the labyrinth, which Suzanne Collins said is where she first got the idea for The Hunger Games. When the book was new, there was a small group saying that it was a ripoff of the Japanese movie Battle Royale. In Battle Royale, high school students were rounded up and forced to fight to the death. Okay, when you say it like that, it sounds like a ripoff, but it's not. Let me explain. The innocents being forced to fight trope was nothing new. There were probably a ton of gladiator movies that used this device. There was a Star Trek episode where Kirk is forced to fight Spock, In The Deer Hunter, the Viet Cong forced prisoners of war to play Russian roulette. I even remember watching Flash Gordon's Saturday morning cartoons where some alien species throw Flash and his friends into an arena to fight to the death. So I think Suzanne Collins would have come up with this idea even if Battle Royale didn't exist. And in Battle Royale, the teenagers being forced to fight is the entire plot. And that's okay. If a movie has a razor-thin plot just as an excuse to get to some cool fighting, that's fine. But the action better be spectacular. Like the first John Wick, there's very little story. Bad guys steal good guy's car and kill his puppy. Good guy goes on massive revenge streak. That plot is just an excuse to get to the action. But the action in John Wick and Battle Royale is awesome. So we suspend disbelief because they're giving us a reason to. We accept the premise, they reward us with action. In the Hunger Games, the games themselves are not the only thing going on. They're a gimmick to get some action, sure, but the book and the movie are really about a revolution. The games are a backdrop for the oppressive world and also serve as the breaking point for the oppressed. There's way more story here than Battle Royale. And one way she expands this world and makes it more than just teenagers fighting to the death is by bringing in the element of reality television. Remember when I talked about Roman gladiators? Well, the ancient Romans used the term bread and circuses. They'd have gladiator games in the Colosseum, give out free food, and the people were distracted and placated with food, booze, and a show. So yeah, the idea of the citizens of Pan Am getting into the spectacle of the Hunger Games isn't an impossible leap. Keep in mind, the Hunger Games came out when Americans were busy watching Fear Factor and American Idol while they were in 2 wars. The backstory of the Hunger Games is far-fetched, but believable within the world Suzanne Collins created. There was a failed attempt to overthrow the Capitol, and as punishment, they started the Hunger Games. The people go along with it because they had no choice. They lost a war and would have starved to death if they didn't agree. And now it's been going on so long, they're numb to it and even look forward to watching and rooting on the tributes from their district. Distracted by bread and circuses. Compare this to another dystopian teen fantasy that came out in the wake of the Hunger Games, The Maze Runner. In The Maze Runner, teenagers enter a maze, having had their memories wiped. They fight different creatures and ultimately figure a way to get out of the maze. Eventually, we learn that they were put there because the adults wanted to figure out a cure? Or what? If you were in the place of the adults and needed to find a cure for the virus, would you pitch, okay, check this out. We wipe kids' memories, stick them in a maze with weird creatures, and see who figures a way out. That's the best possible way to find the cure. I would have almost preferred a John Wick or Battle Royale setup of evil people throw kids in a maze and made them fight their way out. Or even rich people offer poor people a ton of money for whoever survives the maze, like Squid Game. A razor-thin plot is better than an overly convoluted plot.
We've got to find a way out of here.
Even if you made it through, you'd still have to survive the lurkies, and they're lurking everywhere.
And you can only kill a lurker with the Zoomerang. But nobody's seen one of those for 1,000 years to the day.
Unrelated, do you have any necklaces?
Just this one.
You're the chosen one, and I'm a virgin pregnant with your baby.
Well, that sucks.
Suzanne Collins is a skilled enough novelist to balance several things and make sure all the different elements she adds make sense in that world. This is a tricky juggling act, but she was a television writer before she wrote The Hunger Games, and everybody knows former television writers make the best novelists. The other thing the reality TV aspect in The Hunger Games accomplishes is it puts a fresh spin on something that was cliché before The Hunger Games and continues to be cliché. The love triangle. We've seen it many times before. Main character has 2 potential love interests with 2 completely different personalities. Who will she choose? By putting Katniss and Peeta in the games, where they're not only fighting for survival, but they're forced to play to the camera. We never know if Katniss and Peeta are actually falling in love or if they're just putting on a show. This is a nice twist on the tried and true. And this was not the only time Suzanne Collins put a unique twist on what could have been cliché. Katniss follows the hero's journey, but instead of the mentor being a wise old sage with gray hair who wants to help her on her quest, usually because he was friends with her parents, she gets Haymitch, a drunk who only helps her because he's forced to, and even then he does it begrudgingly. Instead of Katniss being the chosen one because of some divine prophecy revealed when she discovers that birthmark was no ordinary birthmark.
The mark!
He's the chosen one.
She becomes the chosen one when the leaders of the revolution choose her, because during the games she proves herself as a leader who could outsmart the game makers and use her newfound fame to unite people against the oppressive government. There are no new ideas, but you have to find a way to put new spins on old ideas and make them make sense in the world you've created. And Suzanne Collins did that much more effectively than the copycats that followed. If you got caught up in the YA dystopian future trend of 10 years ago, that means you're 10 years older now and should be reading stuff aimed for a slightly older audience, something like my novel, Falling into Shadow. It's not teen fantasy, but it does have a couple of teenagers coming of age. They aren't split into groups. But don't read it if you're one of those people that complain, "The Hunger Games is too violent, wah, wah, wah."